Welcome, book fiends, to Wicked Good Books, a channel dedicated to books and all things book adjacent. My name is Nick, and I am joined today by the tenacious and tremendously talented Cherae Clark. Cherae, also C.L. Clark, is a BFA award-winning editor and author of the Nebula-nominated novel The Unbroken, the first book in the Magic of the Lost trilogy. Their work has appeared on Tor.com, Uncanny, and Beneath Ceaseless Skies. They have been a personal trainer with a collection of beloved kettlebells, an English teacher, and an editor. Cherae, I'm a big fan of your work. I follow you on social media and genuinely enjoy your perspective and commentary on books and media we seem to have in common. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
I've been just waiting eagerly for any just little hints of the art for book 2 to drop ever since the day I finished it. So I'm just like chomping at the bit. That'll be a question for later, but I just had to throw it in there because it's been killing me.
Well, I can tell you for now that it looks very, very good. I've only seen the sketch, but
I can only imagine. I'm very, very excited for it. One of my favorite artists. So, but before we get into your work, I want to get to know you a little bit more, and for my listeners too, before we jump into your work. So, I read you are from Kansas City, but you live in the UK now currently. Do I have that right?
Yep.
So what did you just decide to leave the US? I mean, I don't these past 5 years, I don't blame you. I'd love to live somewhere else too. But the UK seems so like compelling to me. I didn't know if there was a work reason or something else that drew you to it.
So actually it was kind of the last 5 years, but it's layered. It's a bit layered. So I actually, when I was a kid, I always wanted to move to the UK, and I got a chance to because of my stepmom's job when I was in high school. So I ended up finishing high school here. I did the last 2 years just outside of London in Staines. And I went back to the States for university. But always kind of wanted to go back. I knew that Kansas City, as much as I loved it, wasn't going to be the place I stayed. Then I went to grad school, and then Trump happened, and so that was that was the beginning of my re-reckoning with where I was going to live.
Absolutely.
So I had to figure out that, and I ended up actually moving to Taiwan first. So I was teaching English, and I actually really liked it. There were a lot of things I loved about it. But I wasn't picking up Mandarin well enough to live there long term, I think. Right.
Totally different change from Kansas, I'm sure.
And the UK was calling me. My partner lives here though, and that was the main decider where we ended up stopping.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Taiwan must have been so cool though. Like, was that just like a from the hip decision we're going to Taiwan, or
that was yep, that's exactly what it was.
I love that. My wife, she's been to Ireland and a couple parts of I think the UK, and that's about it. I have not left the US. I've been like briefly to Canada. It doesn't really count though. I don't think I was legally in it long enough to say I've been somewhere. So that's a bummer, but I want to leave so badly, and the UK is on my list. So I saw that, and I wanted to ask you about it. It seems really cool. You said you got your MFA in the US, correct? That's awesome, because I went to school. I have my bachelor's degree in creative writing, but I went back to school for my MFA in film production. And I'm always curious to ask other writing grads what it was like going to school for your MFA in writing, because my MFA program, my bachelor's program for writing was only 4 years, but it was like, I was straight out of high school, 18 to 21. It was just I was not in a good student headspace to take on anything really. I did learn a lot, but I feel like I would maybe have done so much better going for an MFA program in writing. Because I feel like MFAs is where you really, at least for my second degree, it's where you start to think of it more as like a career and a little more, still a passion, but it feels more career based and more like a mastery. And I don't know if that was something that you felt going for your MFA in writing or not.
So that's interesting, actually, because I went in. I was a big nerd, though. I always have been, and so I was very academically inclined, shall we say. But I also knew from a very young age that I wanted to write. Like, I knew that's what I was going to do. And so some of that was like, oh, well, will I be a journalist? Will I be a journalist and a novelist? Will I be a screenwriter? Like I didn't always know what I was going to write, and I'm still actually I don't think that's particularly closed path. But what became the Unbroken actually started in college, undergrad, because I was in a lot of classes I really enjoyed. I ended up I minored in French, and one of my teachers, she taught this Francophone African literature course at the same time as I was in a literary theory course that had a lot of post-colonial theory and literary theory involved, and those two just like smashed together at the same time, and I was like, oh my God, like this is I need to write about this, because I was also doing an analytical paper, or not paper, because I turned in the first chapter of the Unbroken of that time as the paper, but it was about it was like a fantasy literature analysis type thing, and so I was like, I could apply these same things. We're never studying fantasy, even though that's one of the most colonial literatures there is, like sci-fi and fantasy. And so yeah, I think I did get a lot out of my undergraduate study. And the difference between undergrad and my MFA, I don't honestly think I was in as much of a craft focused MFA. I don't think I was in as much of a craft focused MFA so much as one that just let me sit and do the work I wanted to do, and also do the work I thought I needed to do to make money. Like the reason I went to go get an MFA was because I couldn't get any of the jobs I wanted without extra credentials, and some of that was doing stuff working with libraries, and so I wasn't sure if I wanted to get like an MLS, MLIS in library studies, or if I wanted to get the MFA and do other teaching type things. And I ended up going for the writing degree, because I figured if I'm going to do one thing, that's what I wanted. Right. And the MFA also gave me a chance to not only get more teaching credentials, but also to network with other writers, to meet a bunch of like my peer writers who have gone on to do really awesome things, like Megan Giddings, who is an amazing sort of slipstream writer. Her latest book is just coming out. I think it's called The Women Could Fly, or When the Women Could Fly. I'll get the real title so you can put it in. But also just my professors, they've been really supportive. And also just I had the chance to take extra random classes that were related to my research. So it was actually in grad school that I started studying Arabic, and was able to use the Arabic and the French together to go do more research for the Unbroken. So
I read that too. A lot of the naming conventions and some of the world building came from that, which I love when studies and things that you're passionate about kind of fuse their way into your work. I think it just, you can always tell a difference when someone's passions kind of like find their way into their work. And that was kind of the same for me. My undergrad was a lot of like me really wanting to write sci-fi stuff, and my teachers being like, you can't get there yet. You got to write contemporary and read all the classics. And I was like, okay. And towards the end, I got a little better, but I also studied a lot of like psychology and sociology when I was in my undergrad, and I really felt like that helped inform my writing now. But I've always considered going back for writing, but I went back for film, and I still touched on tons of things that I think really informed my writing now, especially in film class, learning about like film theory and cinefiction and screenwriting. It like totally changed the way I view my writing. So now going back to it now, years later, I graduated 2015 with my MFA, and now I'm just starting to get back into writing. So it feels like kind of coming home a bit, and kind of coming a full circle to I think now what I'm meant to be doing, but what I think I have the most fun doing, which is writing. And for me, it was always a big part of my life. And I wanted to ask you, growing up, you mentioned storytelling and wanting to be a writer was always part of the plan. Did you have big storytellers in your family, or were you sort of exposed to reading and writing at an early stage?
Yes and yes.
I love that answer.
Though I want to add, like, I also had the same situation in undergrad. I turned in this really awesome short story about an assassin, and I still want to kind of dig it out sometime and see how it works.
Yeah.
But my teacher was like, gave me a little A on it and said, next time, let's see something a little bit more, in the real world. And I was like, all right, well, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
But there were a couple professors there, none of them actually who were my actual creative writing teachers, who were really supportive of the genre stuff. One of them is Giselle Anatole, who now she runs the University of Kansas Gun Center for Science Fiction.
Wow.
So she's awesome. And man, if it wasn't for her, then who knows what would have happened to me. But back to the childhood storytelling and stuff. My family, I think in general, they're really storyteller heavy. I don't know if it's like a Southern thing, a Midwest thing. Maybe it's just the way people are, but it was either like somebody was gossiping about somebody, you'd sit and I'd be just like a little kid listening to everything. But also both of my grandmothers were teachers. And so I learned to read really young, I think. I don't know, like pretty young. And I was always carrying books around as a small child. My mom said I would sneak them when I was like little. I would sneak them with me and like steal her little like nurse pen light.
Yeah. And
I wasn't reading, but I would just, I guess, repeat the words she would read to me in the bed. But yeah, so I've been doing it for a really long time. And my mom is a poet and storyteller as well. I think she would write these kind of narrative poem rhymes to get us to do stuff. Like I remember there was one about the selfish girl named Gimme Kimmy and a stinky boy who didn't take a bath, and his name, or maybe it was a girl, I don't know, Smelly Nelly Peter Wink. Was that one. There were a lot. She had like a whole series of these characters. I should ask her if she still has that notebook.
Just unearth that notebook for those gems,
yeah.
right? I love that. That's amazing. I'm always interested to see, the early stages of storytelling, to see when it like you got kind of bit by that bug, or like the desire to tell stories. I talked about this on a recent interview with Kirsten Hall. How like in my family, it's a big Italian family. I'm from New Hampshire. We're currently, my wife and I, my kids are living in Florida for the time being on the Space Coast. But we're from New England, and it's like a big New England, loud Italian family where tons of cousins and uncles and aunts. And if everyone's telling a story at the dinner table, and we're hanging out for, whether it be Christmas, Halloween, Thanksgiving, whatever holiday it was, and if you didn't talk fast enough, like you couldn't get your story in. So you got really good at talking fast, but also like, getting the room's attention. It had to be worth telling too, because if you weren't funny or you weren't telling something that was cool, like no one picked on you again. So that's like the earliest stages, for me. But I feel like my mom too she really was big on buying books for us and like putting us in the path of libraries and bookstores and scholastic book fairs, which I love.
Oh yeah.
She was very supportive about my brother and I wanting to bring home books, and I got into writing. There was like a contest in elementary school for like writing this drawing picture book thing, and I wrote about this like fictional story about my gecko that I had, a pet gecko that got loose around my house. It was like running rampant. It was real bad, and I'm really happy. I think it burned in a house fire we had as kids. So
No.
So no one will ever have to see that, But it started me off. I mean, thinking, I can put all these words together, these pictures, and bind it together in this like really crappy computer paper, and now I have this thing that's mine as my story. That's not very great, but at the time I thought it was amazing. So it started there, and then I went into like movies where I watched The Fifth Element for the first time, and Star Wars, and The Mummy, and these films like projected me into like, I want to tell those kind of stories. which then led me to like video games. I played Final Fantasy VII for the first time at a very too young age to be playing Final Fantasy VII. It was technically my cousin's game. He had gotten it, and I had gotten like a game called like Evolution something. It was like a much more anime kid version of Final Fantasy, basically. And I was so jealous of his game because he was showing me pictures of Cloud and Red 13, all the characters from Final Fantasy VII. And I'm like, I want to tell stories about them. So I would like steal his booklet when I was over there and like just read through the characters. And it was way above my level. But I was like creating like these ideas of who these characters were in my head. And that for me is like, that was the seed of me wanting to tell them stories. For sure.
I think that's garbage, yeah. I think that's actually, you hit on something that's kind of interesting to me, because I also had a like book to movie to video game pipeline, but mine was different. I wanted to act, actually. So I was also in theater, and I was like, well, if I can either write the stories or I can be in the story. And so sometimes I'm pretty sure that the writing of the stories is just so that I can still be in them somehow. Like, oh, I want to have a sword. Well, then here, let me just, this is me with a sword.
Let me go practice with a real one in real life too.
Yeah, and so now I get to do that. But at the time when I was a kid, I was like, well, mom's never going to give me a sword, but she will give me these books. So
yeah, but she can't give me a pencil and paper, and I can make it look real cool or sound really cool. Yeah. I love that you were like vicariously living through your words, which is really cool too. I dig that. Yeah, it started that way, and then I don't know what happened along the way after Final Fantasy, but I just crashed into anime like hard. Like I was hitting every Toonami and Adult Swim show and just writing my own Digimon and Dragon Ball Z fanfiction. I'm so happy that if my book ever comes out, that no one will ever be able to dig through an old tweet, just because this is before the internet, but you just hypothetically be like, oh, I found Nick Kimball's Digimon smutty fanfiction that should never see the light of day.
Oh man,
thankfully it's gone.
I think my Wheel of Time stuff might still be out there in the world, if I'm totally honest. But
internet, you have your mission.
The stuff at the first site is gone. Like they lost that server. I know. Now I have it, but I'm not putting it out there.
Did you ever use things like Elftown or Zanga?
I am gonna just say no. It may or may not be true, but I'm not going to tell you.
I was like, I'm probably aging myself greatly here. Elftown, that was
no, I don't know Elftown, but I do know Zanga.
Cool. Yeah, I need to figure out my login password so I can log in there and archive some stuff, some old writing. But I love that, and thank you for sharing. Those. I know they're personal stories, and it leads you to who you are today. I think it's amazing. So talking about films, like you mentioned, and video games and acting, which, by the way, tour.com/any major producer that's watching, if they're watching this, just keep that in mind for the hopeful Lock Tomb live action series. Sarah Clark is in the running.
Pick me.
Yes. So what films or books inspired you early on in life the most? I know I can assume we both are big readers and we've read a lot. I'm very curious to see for you what book or movie or both really catapulted you into the storyteller you are today.
It actually kind of is both book and movie. I think Wheel of Time is one of the things that really showed me where I wanted to write in, because I think my very first stories and stuff, some of them were poems and some of them were I was telling horror stories to my cousins on long car rides. They were little Goosebump adaptations.
Yes.
But then I hit epic fantasy, and the beginning of my first ever novel, intentional novel, was very closely, almost exactly plagiarized version of Eye of the World. The first chapter anyway.
Yeah.
But so I found that, and then I was lucky to have some older adult fantasists in my life who were like, okay, well, there's this movie coming out. It's called Lord of the Rings. Have you read the book?
Yeah.
And I was like, no. And so they took me. It was actually the second one. So they actually set me in front of the first one for 2 hours before the next showing of the movie. So then they just like, all right, here we go. We're going to go.
Speed run.
And then they dropped me back to finish the first movie. And yeah, that was kind of the beginning of the end for me. And obviously I was a big Alana kid, Tamara Pierce.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? Dragonlance. That was also a big one.
Yes.
I was like, I think Kitty Ara made an unfortunate impression on me.
Mm-hmm. That's where I'll begin.
Yeah.
Dragons of Autumn Twilight. That was the first Dragonlance book I had read. After Legend of Drizzt was actually the first of D&D, Forgotten Realms, and Dragonlance that I read.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That changed everything for me
Drizzt
too.
might have been one for me, like the first Forgotten Realms-y type book.
Homeland.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, that one. I got in Hobbit. I think I was in middle school, and it seemed like just high enough where I was like, I know I'm not really understanding most of this, but I'm enjoying it. And then someone had given me a Raymond E. Feist book at a way too early age. I was like, this is great, but also very inappropriate. So I felt like I was really in trouble whenever I was reading it. And I don't know who handed me Homeland first. And I wish I could figure this memory out, because I think it's not where it all started, because we kind of like started where it all started, but this is like where it was like, oh, this is different. Where Ari Salvatore is like, I'm going to take all those things that everyone's been doing and just completely subvert them with Drizzt onward. And that took off for me.
Yeah, that was definitely. I remember who gave me my first Drizzt book. I don't remember the order, if it was like Dragonlance first and then Drizzt, but now that I'm thinking about it, but I do remember. And I don't know where he is. Sometimes he was like a really big fantasy kid, kind of like an older brother.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, oh, I hope you see this book, because I know you're still in those shelves.
Like, yeah, for sure, right? That would be so cool. Just cross that. It was because of me. I love that. So, yeah, I mean, Lord of the Rings was a big one for me too. I think for many fantasy fans too, because the films were just so like extraordinary, larger than life, and for their time especially. And even now, you can still go back and rewatch them, and I still find them extremely motivating and inspiring. So, I guess then what I want to know then, because that was early for you. You mentioned Wheel of Time. That was the thing. So I am on 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I just finished book 11 recently a year, and it's everyone calls it the slog or whatever. It's like the 4 books in the middle that were probably meant to be 2. And my assumption is at the time, Tor.com was like, Jordan, we want you to stretch it out a little bit. But they're still pretty good. I am very excited, and also bittersweet excited for Knife of Dreams, because that's the last one Robert Jordan wrote before he passed away. But I've never read past that point, so I'm almost there. I'm pretty excited. I love those books too. I wish that I had gotten them early on, because they feel much more accessible and just slightly more progressive than even Middle-earth and Tolkien's works, which have their own merits too, but I feel like I wish I had gotten to Wheel of Time sooner. And I'm always curious to find out like how you learned about Wheel of Time over Tolkien, or it seems like you did both, but
Wheel of Time was definitely first. And it goes back to some bookseller, some book packager, because somehow the Eye of the World got split into 2, illustrated, and put in a Scholastic book fair. And I was like, this is what I want. And then I spent like a few months asking for family members to take me to the bookstore so I could find this book. Couldn't find it, because obviously I thought it was a kid's book. And eventually I just got up my courage and went to the bookseller and was like, help me find this book series, because it says there are like 50 of them. Where are they? And so she just took me to the adult section, and that's when like that was the real beginning of the end.
Oh,
then I was just like, wow.
But there's a whole section of these?
Exactly. And then I had to go take my dad and tell him to make the librarians give my card the adult checkout power. And they're like, guys, she's 13. My dad was like, give it to her. I don't care.
Yeah, I'll unlock it. Unlock the whole library for her. Give the keys to the kingdom.
Yes.
What an unsung hero that librarian is. I love that. I don't know why Wheel of Time eluded me for so long. It was just not a book on in my orbit around me. No one was reading it. It wasn't in stores. And around the time I was in high school, I was working for Borders Books, and that's when I started seeing it. I saw it shelved all the time, and it just looked like, to me, I was like, okay, this seems like very Lord of the Ringsy. At the time, I was like deep into my Drizzt and Dragonlance obsession, so I thought it would be like not going backwards from Legend of Drizzt and that kind of bright, vibrant, epic fantasy, but I for some reason thought it was just going to be like a knockoff of Tolkien. And then when I finally got to it, which was really like 2 years ago, and like binged the first 11 books, I was like, man, this would have made such an impact on me had I gotten to it earlier. So I'm always fascinated to learn people's journeys there. So we've talked a little bit about our inspirations and growing up as storytellers and how those seeds were planted in our lives. Talking about now, you've made it. You are the author of The Unbroken, which I read this year and absolutely I blasted right through it. I devoured it. I couldn't stop. I couldn't put it down. I try to read like 2 or 3 books at a time. It's more like, if I'm at work, I got audiobooks. When I'm home, it's physical. And I'll do like, and I'll go back and forth. When I started The Unbroken, I paused everything. I also bought the audiobook for it. So I was listening to it at work, and then I would come home and shift and find where I left off and then keep reading physically. I couldn't put it down. And talking about writing and the creation of this book and the series, and of course while you're in school, writing advice is something I always love more selfishly to ask all my guests, because like, I have my patrons over on the Wicked Good Books Discord. They're like, oh, what are you going to ask them, for questions? I'm like, well, first I'm going to ask them for advice because I want to know, because I'm trying to get there. We've talked about Scrivener on social media before. And when did you start using Scrivener? And hop on your soapbox, because I love it so much. I love talking about it.
I love Scrivener. I don't know, like, timestamp wise, couldn't tell you. Probably after 2012, though, because I know I wrote a full draft of The Unbroken before I had it. And so that was all like 300 to 400 pages of Word document, Microsoft Word, hot mess. And luckily I didn't try to edit it there. I had Scrivener by then, and so I just imported it and then just like exploded it like you can, because all you have to do is then like go to the point in the document, say split document here, and you can just do that the whole way through forever. And then you're done. So yeah, I will sing forever about Scrivener. What do I have? So I was just working on book 3 of the Unbroken, or Magic of the Lost trilogy. And feature I have most been using, surprisingly enough, actually, it's been the composition mode, because I'm just trying to get into a focused draft set where I can just kind of like zone out and just type and really get the words out. And so I've been doing that a lot, but my current setup is the full screen and then shift the paper to the left with like the summary note card thing. And then the little word count ticker, because I need that as well. So that's my current visual setup. But I love
that word count thing. It's amazing.
Oh yeah, it just it's sometimes I have to not focus on it, but it really can. Lately it's really what's motivating me. Is just watching that improvement.
Yeah, for sure.
What else am I enjoying playing with about it? Since I am in draft mode, I typically, for the Unbroken series, I divide the narrative into quarters, and then I just start with everything in scenes, and then I realize, actually, this scene is 100,000 words long. Eventually, it's going to be broken up into more scenes, and I'll put it in a folder and a chapter. And then I'll eventually figure out what the titles are, and then compile is the easiest thing in the world. I don't know how people are still drafting in Word.
Yes, that's what I think about that all the time. And that's actually really cool that you will write the whole scene and then go back and be like, oh, maybe this is actually 3 chapters, but the scene itself, I never even thought of it like that. I get way too caught up in like, all right, this part 1 of the book is going to be 10 chapters, so boom, 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 and I always end up like getting caught up and frozen when I do that. For some, I'm not sure why. That's actually really cool. I'll give that a try sometime. That sounds like a cool strategy.
I do actually do it like you though. So I'll have my part 1, and I think, okay, well, if I write roughly this many words per scene, this many scenes, each part should, and I want this many words, each part should have this many scenes. And obviously, when I'm writing, all of that is like screwed. But I can still eventually see the rough word count. So some of the scenes might be like 5,000 words. Some of them might be like 1,000 words. But eventually I'll do the massaging later to even the parts out. And because it's Scrivener, all I have to do is drag it, drop it, and then it's it.
I love it. It's, I spent a lot of money on other apps because I was convinced that Word this can't be it. There's got to be something else that can help me the way I write, which is just kind of scatterbrained, but also like ordered chaos.
Yeah.
Where I have like inspirational art. I might have like a song that I like to listen to when I'm writing in this character's head, or I might have a map that I want to look at to kind of reference certain things I'm writing. Whatever it might be. In Word, you just can't do that easily, at least not that I've unlocked. I've seen people use Word like just absolute warlocks and like unlock parts that I didn't know existed with Word, but it's just too much for me. So I had found Scrivener, I want to say it had to have been around like 2012 or 2013, like pretty early on, and I did not utilize it to its fullest potential. I was pretty much just like, I have one folder for text documents and one folder for art, and that's it. Whereas now I have like taken my current whip and just exploded it, where it has all these different things. I got notepads and I have drafts, and it helps if you have a chaotic brain or a brain that likes order too, to kind of make all that make sense to you. And no one else looking at it. Like I've shown my wife or I've shown my friends, this is what I'm working on. They're like, how can you understand any of that? I'm like, it's my chaos.
Yes,
I understand it.
This is my hole. It fits me.
Exactly. And it's like Scrivener really came through. That they come through with the app, and I think they're an awesome company. I'm so happy that they continue to improve it, and I cannot stop hyping up Scrivener, because I know a lot of writers that will ask me, what do you use to write? And I use Scrivener, and I'll show it to them. They're like, ooh, that's way too intimidating. Yeah. I'm like, it only looks intimidating because I am chaotic. I'm like a mess. I'm a much more organized person. I'm gonna have this looking like, I'll watch some YouTube videos of like Abby Emmons or something. I'm like, her order is significantly more organized than mine is, but
mine is not. I'm also an organized chaos kind of person. Like, if I close everything, then yes, because I put everything in a folder. So we have the notes folder, the characters folder. If you open it, well, God help you.
Utter chaos. I love it. So you're drafting book 3, and we know we have the Faithless, which comes out, I believe I have it listed here as March 7th, 2023. Is that definite?
Yep. Unless things can happen, but right now everybody on my team is planning for it to come out March 7th, March 9th in the UK.
Cool. So awesome. Cannot wait for that. I'm assuming once book 3 is finished, that's probably gonna be the following year.
Yeah, in theory, we should be on schedule. Things can change with edits and stuff. But I'm hoping not, given the time I plan to turn it in. So this will be the main gap, is the 2 years in between number 1 and number 2, which has incidentally bought us some cushion for book 3.
Woo! I'd love to hear that.
But yeah, I think, but ARC should be coming out soonish.
Ooh, good to know. I'll have to hop on my NetGalley. So this is a question that fascinates me too, because I know a lot of writers do this, where they'll export from Scrivener. There's a way you can like export your rough draft or your send to print or send for editing draft. Do you utilize that feature, or do you have to copy and paste into something else?
Nope. So cool. Absolutely not. Because, well, if I were to try that, it would ping back so many errors and I would miss all of the things. But I really use the comment section very heavily. And so I'll export it. This document, I'll export it as a Google or as a Word document for my editor, but I'll leave all my comments on it so that she can see my thought process and also respond to them, because they'll port just like other like a comment in Word. So,
in Word, the side, the sidebar.
Yep.
That's awesome. I love it. I love utilizing it. I hope my goal was to finish the first draft for my current whip by the end of the year. So we'll see how that goes. But I've just started utilizing Scrivener more. I don't know if I'm going to take part in NaNoWriMo this year because I really want to prioritize this what I'm working on. This actually came from 2 NaNoWriMos ago. So I feel like if I even think of doing it again for NaNoWriMo, it's just going to be like a personal upset. But are you taking part in NaNoWriMo this year, or have you in the past?
I have actually. I think I might even be on a kind of nano-themed podcast later in the future to talk about this particular set of adventures. But the Unbroken, I wrote a good chunk of the first draft during Nano, and I also wrote a very bad first finished novel, and some like Nano, like I don't know what year, 2009 maybe. Very, very early days. But yeah, so I've done Nano a couple times, and I think technically I did it last year, but I was just working on the Faithless.
Awesome.
But hopefully I will have turned in. I call book 3 The Sovereign. I don't know if the title's gonna stick.
I was like,
so that's the working title. So I don't know if I'll finish Sovereign before that. Then, but my plan is to have sent the email by October 31st, and then I can play around with novella, or I don't know. I've even been thinking about writing a rom-com, so
that'd be awesome.
Something like that during November, but just lower stress.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe reading some books. Probably, definitely not hitting the 50K mark, but just to enjoy it.
I love that. That's going to be my next question too. Are you reading anything currently while you're drafting book 3, or when you're drafting, are you just like no influences, no books?
Oh no, I love influences. I love them so much because they teach me how to write.
Yeah. Same.
So I'm kind of like you. I've got a full set of things. Like I'm listening to Persepolis Rising. I'm looking down because I also have a physical copy of it. So Persepolis Rising, which is one of the Expanse books, and so sometimes I'll hear something and a chapter will just like knock me on my feet, off my feet. So I have to go to the physical book and reread the chapter and just figure out how they did that to me.
Yeah.
And then I have to go figure out how to do that to you guys.
Yes. I love that.
So I'm listening to that book, and I also have a copy of, I'm really excited, The Stars Undying by Emery Robin. And basically, I got sent this arc because one of my UK editor was like, look, Cherae, I have a book for you. You just need to take it. It's Butch Mark Antony and Cleopatra. Just do yourself a favor. And I said,
you're like,
and I'm ready. I'm just, so I just started that one, and I'm also, so that's my space book. This is how I work. I have like an audiobook, a space book, physical book, and my fantasy book is Joe Abercrombie's The Wisdom of Crowds, the last of that trilogy.
You're ahead of my 3 books.
Yeah, so I love Joe Abercrombie. He's another really big influence. And so I spend a lot of time studying him as well, like taking notes, not in my fancy hardbacks. I actually had to buy a paperback in addition to, so I could scribble in it.
Yeah.
And then I'll read like a nonfiction. And so that one right now is a short story craft book.
I love that.
I guess it's not just short story, but writing craft.
I love that. Joe Abercrombie, he's something else. I'm on book 3. I think it's called Red Country, which is like the middle novels.
Yeah.
And I'm jumping right. My goal was 2022. I want to knock out Joe Abercrombie. So January, it was Blade itself. And it was my second time reading it. And I had stopped after that. This is way back in like 2015, I want to say. It just didn't speak to me for some reason the first time. And I think
that's my favorite of the standalones.
I love it. And I was kind of like in a Game of Thrones headset. Like that's what was on TV and that's what I was reading. And then like I was so limited to what I was reading at that time. And then coming back now, years later, picking Blade itself back up and going forward with it, I'm like, wow, I don't know what I was thinking before. This is amazing. He's definitely he's one of my top 10 favorite authors. Actually, I had him listed down here when we talk about your characters. Had questions. So before we do that, before we jump into your work, so I'm very excited to talk about that the most. For NaNoWriMo and for writing and Scrivener and all the things we were discussing about the craft and our work process, it seems like we're very similar, like controlled chaos, lots of inspiration. I like to kind of bury myself in it. I've noticed for myself since the pandemic, taking on too many projects has been what has been just kicking my ass. So like the podcast, I told myself after season 1, I'm taking a year, till 2023 for season 2. Looking at books, I dialed it back to like, okay, I don't really want to do traditional booktube videos anymore because it's not me. I want to do something that I'm passionate about, and that ends up being like just storytelling and writing, and that's kind of what that's going towards, which will also hopefully inform writing, I hope. So that's kind of where my head's at. And now that I'm back to my whip, I've been so passionate about just surrounding myself with books to read that just inspire me, that I'm like, how do they do that? And Unbroken was one of those books recently. And I wanted to ask you, did you workshop these books with anyone, or is it just you and your editor? Because I found that's the one thing that has been pulling me through, on top of surrounding myself with new content that's just talking about new progressive ideas or just subverting genres in their heads. There's that. And then there's getting my old workshop group back to get the band back together again, so to speak. They're all new faces, but like it's been so long since I'd workshopped, and it has been the best thing that's happened to me in years. I didn't know if you workshop your work or you just very keep to the chest, very private about it.
So I was working on multiple drafts of this during my MFA. It was actually my thesis project. But it's very hard to do that in an MFA because you can't give them the whole book. You're doing chapters at a time, and you never have enough to go through. And so I got some okay feedback. I got some less okay feedback, as you do, because we also were not everybody was not expressly there for genre stuff. So I ended up sort of shooting over to doing short stories. Some of it was genre short stories, but it stopped being functional for me to write the novel. But then I also got tired of wasting my time doing work I didn't want to focus on just for workshop. So it was I like when I talk about the MFA, I think the most useful thing I got out of it was not the workshop but the people, because I would go to the little like English department workroom, and I met some of the people who did become my later readers. People from the different aspects of the PhD English program, like the medievalists. Really, it was the medievalists who were like, "Yeah, fantasy."
Yes. Huzzah!
Yeah, and so they're some of my really good friends, and they read the novel, gave me really good feedback, and then I found other folks later who, like 2 people read The Faithless before my editor, and my agent did as well. The Faithless was a lot harder to write than like
sequels.
Sovereign. I think, but Sovereign is coming out much more easily than Faithless. I think there's something about that second book, man.
I'm so excited to read it, but I can imagine just, whether it be the pressures of the first book success or just continuing a story that feels new and exciting. I can only imagine like all the different things that go into writing a sequel. It makes me think about my favorite films and books too, and those sequels, like The Great Hunt, or is The Wild Hunt? The Wild Hunt. No, it's The Great Hunt. The Great Hunt is the sequel to Eye of the World.
Oh yeah. Great.
What an excellent sequel. And like it's such a flex for Robert Jordan to say, I'm going to write the first book as an homage to Tolkien, and pretty much, love it or hate it, it succeeds in doing that. And then I'm going to write the sequel, which should be technically the hardest thing for him to have done, and be like, I'm just going to knock it out of the park and just completely subvert what you thought this whole series was going to be about, or at least the flavor of fantasy was going to be. I was like, son of a bitch, but super cool. And I can't wait to see what you've done with The Faithless. I'm very excited for it. And so let's jump into your work then, talking about The Unbroken. I devoured this book, like I mentioned earlier, and one of the main things that I wrote down here in my notes for things I want to talk about, and not just for this conversation, but also just like when I'm reading, sometimes I'll highlight, sometimes I'll take notes, depending on the book. If it's just like a book that I'm enjoying, but I know I'm not going to come back to, like I know I'm going to read Unbroken next year. It's just, I'm probably going to read before book 2 comes out. I'll write things like in little notes and I'll leave them inside for next time I read them. And tone kept coming up for me when I was reading Unbroken, and I don't know if it was just Terrain's like just her dialogue or her personality, or just Luca and everything surrounding that character is just aesthetic. I don't know if it was that or if it was just a vibe of the zeitgeist of that story, the moment that story was taking place. I love it when books take place in like a moment. And I know that sounds overly simplified, but work with me. So
I know what you mean.
So in Hamilton, we jump in and we know when Hamilton is happening, because it's just this quintessential moment in history.
Yeah, a very fully formed context.
Yeah, it's almost like the last, what's that book called? The last day of night, like the last day before electric lights were a thing. You know, like there's just like this palpable feeling in the air when you're reading it. You bottled that and captured it in the Unbroken. I felt like you could feel that tension and unease between these two just factions, these two groups of people that's trying to make it work, but just not being able to get on the same page with certain things, but also just like the atmosphere. So I guess tone and atmosphere, those two things working together in tandem. And I feel like that's definitely something that I feel is pertinent in Joe Abercrombie's work. And I didn't know what influenced that in your work. And if nothing at all, just to completely compliment you on it, because it's one of my favorite aspects of the book.
Thank you.
And then thirdly, just be like, how'd you do that? And tell me how, so I can write it down so I can follow it up for my own purposes.
I mean, well, first, thank you. Yeah, because like any comparison to Joe Abercrombie is just, but and
the Hamilton vibes, because that's what I had the whole time reading.
Yeah, I listened to a lot of Hamilton while I was revising it, so I'm glad that came through as well. But I think the thing is, and this is actually something that I think I learned from my short story classes, even maybe especially the contemporary real world stories. Like my teachers would always say, you're writing this story, it happens today for a reason. If it could happen any other day, then why are you writing this story? Like it should happen on this day for a specific reason. And so this story could not happen at any other point in Balladeer and Cazal's history. And so making sure that the text and the people reflect that is part of the layers and layers of revision I had to do. Because I'm not a very, like, I see everything in my head, so I don't always get it onto the page. And so that's when like editors are like, hey, I can't see any of this. Can you fix that? And so then I'll go through, but mostly it's like actions and dialogue first, and then layers of, and also like the interiority. I like spending a lot of time on how the characters are feeling in a moment. So it's like that stuff comes first, and then the actual image. So action, dialogue, then interiority, and then visual space.
I feel like there's a lot of senses work too, like with touch and smell and taste throughout Unbroken. And I feel like the way you describe those things with like the food and just the culture, even like the clothes, which is something that I notice all the time. And when it's not there in a book, I get like very just what's insufferable about it. To anybody I'm buddy reading it with, where I won't name the book because it's a very popular book series that I read last month. And it's a sequel that everyone really loves, and I was just like not having it, because I'm like, I can't see what they're wearing. I don't know what their garb is supposed to look like. There's great fan art for it, and that's awesome, but also like I need to be able to, like, I'm such a visual person, I want to be able to feel the clothes and imagine what they look like. It really adds that layer to the, you know, the tone and the aesthetic and the atmosphere, and that was something very present in Unbroken as well. So that's really good to hear that, you know, and see your process broken down like that too is awesome. So going into themes and world building with that and character development, I've seen you talk a lot about the themes and the world building in other interviews too. So we won't get too caught up on that, but I know that you inspired, or that a lot of this came from the French colonization of Morocco, was at least part of the inspiration for The Unbroken?
Of North Africa in general, and also, I mean, since that was my area of study, yeah. So parts of Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, but also they've also hung out in colonized Vietnam, and obviously the U.S. is an ongoing imperial party. Britain, as you can see this week, is a
topical.
Yeah, it's very relevant.
Yep.
Don't know when you're actually going to air this, but for those of you who are watching this, this is the second week of September, and the Queen of England has just died.
Yep.
So very, very topical.
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I was looking into because I have a very limited knowledge, or at least when I got at school. In my studies, both in college and my undergrad, and a little bit of my MFA, but just looking at Morocco and Northern Africa as it stands, just how large of an area that is, and how that must have affected people. And thinking about in the Unbroken, you really get the sense of that scale too, which is another thing I felt was really not profound, but just like well done in the Unbroken. Is I got a really strong sense of the scale of that area, of the part of the continent they were on, and just like how oppressed those people were in, like, especially the sands. Just like the only other thing I can compare to, I don't know if you've ever read Stephen Erickson's The Malazan series, but it was similar to that, where it just felt like massive.
I have not. I do own the first book, I think, Gardens of the Moon or something like that, but I haven't actually read it. I am glad that you say that, though, because that's actually one of my small insecurities, is that, I mean, because France also took Senegal and good portions of sub-Saharan Africa as well, and so I wasn't actually sure I had done enough to fully not represent, obviously, but to show, because we've spent so much time in just one city, so we won't in book 2. But
woo, can't wait for that. I was going to ask that question. The scale is definitely there, and going back to what we were talking about earlier too, about starting a story off in a moment, and in writing school, as I call it, it's always like, oh, start media ray, start in the middle of the action, and I think a lot of young writers or old writers get stuck in this idea of oh, that just means in the middle of an action. So I'm in the middle of doing dishes. It's like, how about you're in the middle of doing dishes a moment before a bomb is dropped in your backyard? That is significantly more profound than just in the middle of doing dishes. And I wish I had learned or started to think of that way early on in my writing career, because that's what makes, at least those are the books I find are the most moving and inspiring, but also that stand out to me the most, that I remember the most, is that they have a sense of time in them. There's a depth there. There are other books in fantasy that I read where I just kind of feel like I'm either reading a textbook, like a historical reenactment, or kind of like a retelling of what happened. And there are other books I feel like I'm sitting there right next to terrain, eating the spicy food in the middle of a very uneasy feeling, but also beautiful. It's not a grim and dark looking place either. It has its beauties to it too. And I think that's just kind of testament to the world building as well. How much inspiration from real world did you take when you were building out the world? I know you mentioned taking Arabic in college helped you a lot with building the language.
Well, I mean, it's I wouldn't say that it was something that infused so much as I made intentional choices about it, because I really did want to, not I don't have answers for anyone, because it's a very complicated situation. There are some right answers and there are some wrong answers, but I don't have any single definitive answers for how we continue to move on as a genre and talk about things like, colonial exploration, space exploration, magic artifacts, monarchies. I'm not gonna do that kind of preachy type thing, but I wanted to explore how we talk about and fantasize these places. And we've gone to so many worlds that are literally, this is fantasy England, this is fantasy France, this is fantasy Venice. So let's do this. What happens if we take these real fantasy places, and show what they were really like? If we want to pretend, if we want the cool things about this era, let's take all the things about this era
Absolutely.
and really bring it to life. And so that's where a lot of the world building came from. And so when we go to hang out in other places in book 2, I hope that you'll see similar world building touches.
I love that. It feels very lived in raw and real. And that is a huge part of the types of books I'm drawn to, but also I think the ones that have a lasting effect. I talked about this with a recent author interview where I said it's like the difference between like practical effects in a movie and CGI. It's like the practical effects always last longer in your heart and your memory because they always feel real. You can always go back to them. And that's how I feel about books when I'm reading them, when they have like these really lived in, breathing places that are inspired by real events or real places, but kind of also stand on their own. But the author took the time to realize them. And I feel like it seems like that should be like, of course, that's what you should do as a writer, as a storyteller, but it's not always the case. And I found it to be extremely the case with the Unbroken. So I mentioned Malazan earlier because I was reading, I read, it was Midnight Tides right before the Unbroken. And there were 2 books I did not think would be similar in any way until I read them both back to back. And I was like, those books were so different, but they informed each other. It was like a wine pairing, you know. This is great. And I was looking into Stephen Erickson because I was, getting more into the series. And those books are really complicated and convoluted and complex.
That's what I hear.
But it's the reward is worth the pain in the beginning, I guess you could say. And while it is still a large fantasy series written by a white author, and from I think the 80s to late 80s or maybe the early 90s to now, but they are significantly similar to Robert Jordan, a lot more progressive in ways that I did not anticipate when I went into it. And I think maybe some of those things that stuck out in Malazan to me are what popped up again when I started reading The Unbroken. And when I was learning about Stephen Erickson, kind of looking into his writing career and where he got his inspiration from, just kind of see where the connections were. I had no idea that he's is an archaeologist, and spends the most of his time with his wife traveling the world, spending long periods of time on digs with cultures and absorbing that all. And you could really feel it in the books. And I was like, man, I gotta leave this country. I gotta get out of here and get a little more culture before I start putting down the books. But
Glasgow in 2024.
It's true. Make it happen, right? I feel like if you do read those, if you ever get to those books, I know it's a daunting task. You'll have to let me know because I'm curious to hear what you think about some certain parts. And the thing that really stuck out to me the most in Malazan was that he has these moments where men and women have similar roles that you would not see them share in other fantasy series. For example, like soldiers and guards, where it's not made. There's not a lot of attention brought to it, but there'll be a moment where a character walks into a room and there are 4 guards, and all 2 of them are men, 2 of them are women, and it felt, for me anyways, different. And then I was upset that it felt different because I felt like, why shouldn't that be how it is? This is exactly how I want my fantasy to read, even though it might not accurately reflect our world. I like it to be a bit of both. And going into the Unbroken with Cherae's character, I was just right away, as soon as she leapt off the page in the first couple of chapters, I was like, I'm here for this. This is awesome. with her big biceps, and she's got that big Gideon energy, but she's not like Gideon. She's her own character. And I found the 2 of them. I just want to see art or a fan fiction of Gideon and Cherae arm wrestling. I feel like
that exists. It exists.
It exists where?
Yeah, I'll send it.
Send it, please.
It's Kel the bookseller. Yeah, another big Lock Tomb fan on her Twitter. She put one, so I'll send you the link.
Please, because that's gonna get printed out and framed in my house with credit to the author. That's amazing. And going into that 2 characters, at least focusing on the 2 main ones, because we could spend the whole day talking about the vivid characters, especially some of the nastier ones in the Unbroken. But our titular main characters here, our main perspectives and point of views, Cherae and Luca. I love them so much right out the gate, and I liked that I don't want to call it pining, but their interest for each other was pretty quick. It wasn't it's still a slow burn, but it still has that enemies to friends kind of vibe, but it still felt like its own thing. But it also felt really realistic. The way they talked to each other, I believed it wholeheartedly. Their dialogue just felt so organic, and I got it reminded me, Cherae had a little bit of Gideon, a little bit of Hessa from H.M. Long's Hall of Smoke.
Okay.
just with her vibe, and I just need like some fan fiction of the three of them just like beating people up. Like, please, someone make that happen. And then with Luca, at first I was like, oh, this kind of reminds me a little bit of Galacta from First Law series with John Abercrombie. Yeah. Just because she's slightly handicapped, she has this injury that really set her back, but then it didn't set her back. She learned how to like not necessarily use it to her advantage, but she didn't let it hold her back. She still continued to be badass and just totally assertive in her role, or at least trying really hard to be. And I found that all these different character references that like were inspiring them. Sometimes when I'm reading something, I'm like, oh, this character reminds me a lot of this character. It'll like override them sometimes, and I have to like learn to separate them. And I had no problem doing that in the Unbroken, because very early on, I was like, oh, Cherae's get me some new characters here that I'm going to fall in love with, and I'm just 100% ready to add these onto my long list or short list of growing all-time favorite characters. Where do these two characters come from? Did it start with them? Did you have these ones in mind before you told the story, or did the story come first and they kind of populated it afterwards?
Cherae came first, definitely. So back when I was in those like 3 college classes, the fantasy analysis that I was working on was about violent women in fantasy and when women are allowed to be violent. And if you read the Unbroken, you can see that remains one of my preoccupations.
Yes.
And not just with Cherae, but with all the different kinds of violence and reasons for violence. I really just wanted to explore the different ways and reasons, motivations for women being violent beyond what I discovered in my initial research, which was just to save a child or to save your life. That's it. And I was like, nah, that's not real. That's not how it works. And so Cherae, I had this vision, and this is also why it became a gunpowder fantasy and not like just standard sword sorcery, was because the vision I had was someone executing somebody, but they were her own people, and she was doing it with a rifle, and I was like, huh, okay, we can work with this. So Cherae was first. I was like, okay, there's some sort of colonial double speak going on, and that's the character I'm interested in. And then Luca came because I do love me bodyguard royal pairing. And then I was like, okay, it was kind of a standard bodyguard royal pairing at first. And then I was like, nah, because if I'm going to actually do the colonial thing, this needs to be more complicated. And because I decided I wanted it to be, well, this is weird to say, but an honest fantasy instead of a fantasy, because I fully intend to continue writing royals and stuff, but you have to be aware that the fantasy of monarchy in fantasy is literally that. It is a fantasy we've invented. And so I didn't want that one this time around. I wanted to really go deep into the messy machinations of it. And so we had a really, really bad Luca. And then some of my readers were like, look, if you ever want them to like actually kiss consensually, you cannot do this. And I was like, okay, we'll pull it back just a little.
Yeah. That's awesome.
So then we got medium bad Luca.
Medium bad.
Yeah.
She's what a compelling character. Just like totally stands on her own and subverted a lot of my expectations of that character too. Because going into it, at least right when I first met her, I was like, okay, I think I have an idea where this is going. And then very quickly it was like, I have no idea where this is going. But then I was like, ooh, I hope this is going where I think it's going, which is like my journey with the Unbroken. And I thought that was really profound. So they came before the initial whole story came, those tracks of the story, or organically with it.
I think so. I got the like bodyguard and royal thing, and then the revolution came quickly after. Luca did not solidify into herself until I think a bit later, but I think other things that helped were like I knew it was going to be a revolution story. I also knew there was going to be some element of a rival story, and that changed quite a lot. But like how Terrain related to the rebels still
Mhm.
was like, I still wanted it to be contentious, if not an outright rivalry. It wasn't an easy thing, and that was important to me.
Which you can totally feel too when you're reading it. Like that all those pieces are there 100%. I am very excited to see. I should say, I don't want to guess it and be completely wrong, so I won't say Tommy, but we'll start with Marceline. I know you've seen Marceline's fan art for the Unbroken, and it is like, I love it so much. Paired with Tommy's art and paired with those two, like I just love them so much, and I can't wait to take that with me to the next book because I kind of found it as I started it. Mm-hmm. So, what can we expect in book 2? And now you don't have to share anything as spoilers, and if you don't want to say anything at all, I totally understand it. But I had to know. And again, the Faithless Magic of the Lost comes out March 7th.
March 7th.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then in the UK, March 9th.
Yep. Tuesday and Thursday.
Awesome. So what can we expect in book 2?
Honestly, it's harder for me just to not give spoilers because I mean, you've seen me on Twitter. I just I want to tell you guys everything. I want to tell you everything because I think it's really good. I think it's great. Everybody gets up to shenanigans. Someone gets slammed against a wall.
We love it.
A lot of people. I mean, it's a fantasy book. People die, and it's also a fantasy book, so some people get undied.
So I can only assume we get to see the ramifications of the events that happen at the end of the first book kind of trickle into the second book. As well, you mentioned new locations too, which I'm very excited to see too.
As far as actual narrative, it is going to follow. So we left the Unbroken off with Luca still not having her throne and Kazal being a sort of new fledgling independent state. But one of the things I really wanted to explore is how divesting from colonies actually worked in our world, which is to say it was very messy. And it was also very shitty on the part of the colonizers. And they would do all sorts of stuff to make the separation as painful as possible, and also dealing with how it feels to become a person who was previously colonized into this new independent world, what kind of growing pains there are in figuring out leadership and stuff like that. So that's the direction we're headed in.
And so we're leaving. It's Kazal is the continent where they're at. And so how much of, and I see that you have submitted to Beneath Ceaseless Skies, which actually I talked to Kirsten Hall about in our last interview because she's, I believe, an editor for that bag. And I can't, cool. And now I really want to go on there and find any posts on there. So do you consider the world of the Unbroken second world fantasy? Or is it amalgamation of other things too? And can we expect to see unique flora and fauna, or is it going to be very much like our world, just a little more fantasy? Where do you see the world of the Unbroken in that scale of fantasy?
Second world fantasy for sure, but in the sense of it's our world in terms of flora and fauna. I mean, there is some defining unnatural creatures careful readers will have seen one type of unnatural human and animal type creature, and we might see more of them in the future.
Still hoping you were going to say. I was like, how do I ask her this? How do I ask her around this question to get them to ask it? So that's awesome. So before I get into actually, I'll save this for after because this is just more of just a gush thing I want to say is just Tommy fucking Arnold doing the art for the Unbroken. What was that like? Did you get to work with him closely, or is it just here's the character, here's some inspiration, do your thing?
It was more like the latter, but if you could have heard the way I screamed when my editor was like, hey, we got Tommy Arnold for the cover. In case you don't know him, here are some things he's done. And I was just like, oh my God.
That's awesome. I love that.
And then a little bit later, I got the first sketch for it, and because my editor was like, "Look, because of who Cherae is and how we want to put you, we're thinking we're gonna take the stereotypical fantasy male posture and give it to her." And I was like, "Yes, sir, that's the one." And we did a similar thing with the cover for book 2 as well. So.
Cannot wait to see it. His art is amazing, and
it's gonna be, oh man, and actually, to be honest, maybe like I don't know. I'm feeling like timing wise, October, November is probably when we'll know. So
that'll be awesome. I love good art in general, of course, on book covers, and I've read some book covers that have some pretty goofy art, cover art that still are amazing books. It's not knocking the books, but it's this perfect combination of when the book is excellent and then the cover is absolutely beautiful, but also when the cover like informs the writing too, and like you bring that image with you. It's just so cool. I always wonder, because I know sometimes authors don't have a lot of control or say in the covers they get or who's on the cover, what they look like, and it's just really awesome to see that. So I would like to think then you're pretty happy with that.
Oh, I'm very happy, and I did get very specific. Like, I didn't talk specifically to Tommy, but I sent a little, like, I think he read the first book that I, like, whatever copy they had floating around, and I sent like a couple paragraphs of description, and I was like very specific about the things that I could not have, like it's like, she's hot, like she's a hot character, but she's hot in a gay way. Okay? And he was like, "Say no more.
I got you."
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah, Cherae and Luca, Cherae especially is one of my favorite new characters in fantasy, and so much so that I was very scared at her fate at the end of book 1. I was actually at work on the audio, and the audiobook is brilliant too. It adds like another immersive layer with the accent.
Russia was so good.
Wow, like it's just like excellent cover artwork, excellent writer, and excellent audiobook art. It's awesome to see it all come together, and I genuinely will tell people, like, get the book, get the audiobook in tandem, check them out. They're really great. But going back to what I said, the audiobook, I was at work with my coworkers, and we were all in a truck together driving to one of our sites, and I got to the firing squad part, and I gasped very loudly. And I was driving, and they thought that like someone was in the road, and it was so funny to like not a knock on the guys I work with, but none of them read at all. So like I'm the book nerd, and they know this, and I don't care. And so like at me being like, you don't understand, something just very critical and nerve-wracking almost just happened. Like, did someone cut in front of you? Was there an animal? Like, way worse. Someone almost or may have just died in a book that I really love. So always a testament to when you just care so much about these characters, and I just wanted to congratulate you on it, but also just like sing your praises. And if you haven't checked out the Unbroken, do yourself a favor, add that to your TBR, the top of your TBR pile. I think it makes a good, fall time, autumn read to it. End of summer, and fizzing out summer days too, which I really dig that as well. So going into my final thoughts here on your books before we kind of close up here on some more nerdy stuff. What are you most proud of with the Unbroken so far? Or are you still deciding that as the series goes? Are you going to look back on the 3 books and then kind of decide? Or is there something specifically about the Unbroken that you feel just outspokenly proud about that you want to talk about?
I feel really proud of a few things. And I mean, first and foremost is just like, I wrote a book. I wrote a big I wrote a big fucking book. I sold it, and people are reading it, and that, like, I mean, it's big enough deal to write a book. Like, I don't care if you ever sell it, but if you can write a story to tell to people, like, that is an accomplishment. And so I feel when I'm not, dying in front of my computer, I remind myself that, like, you did the damn thing. Like, just do it again. But then the other thing that I'm really proud about is that people are connecting with the characters. They're connecting with some arguably, like, not excellent people. Like, they're digging them. And finding things to connect them to worlds they might not have actually considered. And I think from there, the thing that I'm most proud of is how many people have been like, oh, I had no idea. Then I went to go research this and this and this. And that is something I think, like, if I do nothing else, I've done that.
Success, absolutely. And going down to I love that. It's like when, it's like when you're on YouTube or whatever, you find like you're looking for a recipe or a documentary on something, you find yourself falling into like the rabbit hole of just like 400 videos later. I feel like people have read this and want to know more about the inspiration and the themes and some of the things you're exploring here with it, and they fall into this rabbit hole of learning real things that happen in real life. And I think that's really profound and a testament to just a really good book, but also really great characters, because it's a fantasy book and these characters can be pretty unlikable in certain moments, but you love them because they feel real. They feel like people you know or you heard of or you want to know. They don't just feel like fantastical, can do no wrong, and even if they do wrong, it's not the most wrongest thing, so you can forgive them. They do things that make you stop and think and question just you yourself as a person, as well as people you know in the world, and other books that you've read as well. I like to hold up characters to past characters and just be like, wow, I am going to be reading very different things the next decade. Like, I'm going to be moving away from certain genres or certain tropes and things, and not even like as a knock on them, but just like I am now more drawn to these things, And I don't know if that makes any sense, but
yeah, totally.
So, taking a pause here on the amazingness of the Unbroken and learning about your process and learning about the Beldarian and Kazal's country. Going into you personally, I read that you're a personal trainer and you keep a tight workout regimen. I've seen you mess around with some swords, I would say almost professionally. Has fitness always been a major part of your life and your routine? And what's your go-to pump out workout jam?
Definitely not professionally on the swords. Yes, professionally as a workouter type. It was actually my job before I went to get my MFA. Before I decided that, I was a personal trainer, and originally actually I went to school for journalism and exercise science, and then I quit both of those and went English and French only. But I did spend more time in the exercise science side than journalism, which I quit the first day. So
it made that much of an impression on you, huh?
Yeah. But that's.
Well, I've seen that you're writing some nonfiction too, and
I do enjoy it. But I knew I didn't. By then, I knew I didn't want to work for like a periodical expressly. Yeah, so
makes sense.
But yeah, so I was a personal trainer, and so I still do that quite investedly. It's partly because it's fun and I like to be able to do athletic feats. Like, it also keeps me sane on a few different levels. Like, it's very gender relevant. It's also very like, the thing about working out and the thing about writing is that neither of them are things that you see the final result of the day you do it. They are things that you may not see the final results of for many years. At the very least, you probably won't see end result until a year. And so the way they kind of time themselves, I'm often focused on one instead of the other, or they're working very nicely in tandem. And so when one stops being, like when one hits a snag or a point where it feels like I'm plateauing, I can either focus to the other, or the other will remind me, well, this is a normal part of that process. And also the same thing I do to get out of that is the same thing I do in the other. So when I get bored with exercise, and it's not because I'm not reaching X or Y or Z goal, but I just need to switch up the routine for a little bit. And similar, like, I will sneak off in the middle of writing a novel sometimes to outline a different story or write a short story or something like that. So
I love that. Yeah, I I find that working out is excellent for my mental health in ways that I did not know were a thing until my my therapist explained it to me, and I was like, that makes sense. Chemicals, and it's something that I've been like since the pandemic just totally just given up on, and only this past year, which is the same year I've gotten back into writing, I found the two regimens to be very similar because they're both things that, like, at least for me, this is strictly for me personally, I don't necessarily like to do them. I know I need to do them because and once I start going, I love it. But it's like it's like the getting started that I have this trouble, like, hard time with. And so recently, the guys I work with, I were doing these little workout challenges in between shifts, and it just like got me back into it. And it's like informing my writing in a weird way. Like, it's making me more. I'm not as lethargic when I sit down to write. So I feel like and a lot of times, and it just could be like mental health, it just could be being lazy. But I'll sit down to write, and I'm like, I don't want to sit down for the next 3 hours. I could be going for a run, or I could be doing this. And now it's like, well, if I do that first and get myself all not necessarily tired out, but kind of like feeling like I accomplished something and it was active, I can focus on my words, my writing. And I think it's a really cool correlation between those two things.
I think for me, the thing that I think, well, I have to remember, but also I think it's good for people to remember in general, is that, like, all of this can be, and as far as I'm concerned, should be fun. Like, write it. Like, why am I writing if it's not for fun? If I'm not enjoying it, like, why should I do it? And I won't stick with it. And so that's part of switching up the routine, is to find something fun. Like, one of the things I really love, they're scattered around the floor right now, is my story engine deck cards. They're just, sometimes I'm like, well, writing sucks. And I'm like, oh, well, let's go play with these cards. And so that makes it just fun and different. And sometimes it helps whatever story I'm working on, but sometimes it just makes me think back in that headspace of imagining really cool random stuff. Like, oh, what if there's this island where dragons used to be born, and somebody's gonna go diving around there, and uh-oh, they found something. And just like, it's just fun. And just like running can be fun, like to just go out and see how far I can go. Or maybe running sucks today, but you know what's really fun? Throwing a kettlebell around the room. So I don't think that it has to be a drudgery. Sometimes it is. That's how it is. It's a mechanical act, and you don't always want to do it. This goes for writing and exercise. Yeah, 100%. But sometimes you can fix that part.
And I learned that I was talking to Christopher Rocchio about this, about his process. He had said that whenever he feels stuck typing, writing, he'll stop and write by hand, and it could just be absolute trash.
For sure.
But he's like, yeah, that exercises have a different part of my brain. I'm like, I learned that in school, and I don't know when I unlearned it. But that's actually a very good idea. And so I've been trying to do that with, like, I got a little whiteboard, and I'll scribble down notes and things like that. More recently, I'm doing this thing where I'm doing like a double-edged two birds, one stone type deal. Although you shouldn't kill birds with stones, but my daughter's in third grade, and they're doing a lot of long sentence writing and complete sentences and paragraphs, and she's learning it, and she's not necessarily having trouble with it, but all the third graders are like, oh, here's my one-word answer, and they kind of want to be done with it at that point. And so we're trying to teach about storytelling and nouns and verbs and adjectives and complete sentences. So recently, as a way to get me back into physically writing too, we are doing a thing where I write down, we're writing a story together, basically. I will write a sentence, and she's going to write it down, like, just basically copy it, getting it into the hand of, practice of writing down a sentence. And we started that last week, and we're really enjoying it. And I was surprised at how much writing longhand, like, affected my mental health, my brain. I didn't know if you just stick to typing, or it sounds like you do a bit of everything.
Oh no. This is the notebook. This is my, we are almost done. I'm hoping that we won't finish it before I finish the draft, but I got into the habit in the last couple months of basically whenever I get stuck, it's not even getting stuck at this point because it's just part of the process, is outline as far as I can go, like jotting down what happens in the next few scenes. Because I have the basic outline of, oh, this scene, but now I have to go in and figure out, okay, what actually happens. And so I'll write through as many of those that are connected or make sense together or lead to each other based on what I've written. And then, and then I'll take it out and go type through it. And so then I'll have like a few really nice high word count days, and then I'll be like, and the trickle has stopped, and so I have to go back to the notebook, and then I write for a couple days of planning, and then a few more days of and back and forth. So
I love that. Do you find that you find you take breaks to kind of refill the creative well? I find that I almost feel guilty doing it because I always feel like I'm pulling from other people's, like I'm leeching or I'm siphoning other people's creativity. Whether it be a book I'm reading or a video game. Like my brother's got me playing Final Fantasy 14 right now. I'm super into that. I get to play level 50 dark-skinned Vieira bunny girl. It's basically like living my best dreams, essentially. So much fun playing that game. And I also like watch a lot of anime on the side that inspires me. I just finished Arcane finally.
Yeah.
Last week. I know that you're a big fan, so I want to bring that up too. Do you find some of this stuff like you take breaks and like what do you do to fill your creative well when you're feeling it's empty or?
It depends. But I definitely do it. Like there are phases where I can't even read, so it's video games. And like the first, like 2020 in the pandemic when I was starting to write book 2 and doing edits for book 1, I would hit my word count and then spend the rest of the day playing. I think that year was Odyssey, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And then next year / this year, mostly this year, it was Valhalla. And yeah, so there'll be phases when I can't think too much, and so I need some different kind of medium. But other times it's reading, and I don't know what like I told you about the Expanse thing, that sometimes that's how it goes. If a show comes up that really just hits me, wrecks me, like Arcane, or even A League of Their Own is my other hotspot right now.
So good.
There's stuff that I will certainly steal from it, but mostly I really enjoy being bowled over by them as a reader. Like we'll talk about this later, I think in spoiler time, but with Nona, it's another thing like that. Like it's so hard because I'm like, on one hand, I'm like, oh my God, this is the best thing a reader could have ever. And on the other hand, the writer me is like, look, Tamsyn, how did you do this? How did you do this?
Yeah. Same exact reaction I've been having with it. Love it.
Yeah.
So that's great. And I don't know why I always feel so guilty when I take a break from writing to fill the creative well, but like you said, it's not like pulling necessarily from them and taking things from them, but it's like almost like just feeling that, especially when it's good art. And sometimes you can watch just absolute
even bad art is good. It's great.
It can still
but
feel
I think it's part of the job. It's like it is literally part of the job. I mean, even at this point now when I'm getting asked to blur books, like it is part of the job. But also it's just like rest is good. Rest is not something to be earned. It's just it's a natural part of the cycle. And however you rest is however you rest.
I find that, I was talking to someone in my workshop group. We have a group on our Discord. There's like about 6 or 7 of us, all varying degrees of writers, different genres, but for the most part, all speculative fiction. And I was talking to them the other day, like a confession, where I was like, I started writing this whip 2 years ago, and even though I beat myself up about not being done, a lot of that has to do with just time and laziness for me, I have found that some of the best new characters, best themes, and best moments have come more recently and over the years, the longer I've waited. And then I start to think, oh my God, what if I had finished it 2 years ago? This character would not even exist. Or maybe they would, but they probably wouldn't have. And then I start like getting in my head of, okay, how long is too long to wait and let something boil or cook or simmer?
I mean, yeah, you gotta be careful. Otherwise, you might never actually get it out because you're waiting for that next perfect character. Exactly.
It'll be the best story in my head that no one's ever going to read or see. But so that's kind of where I'm at now. So it's awesome to see writers kind of paving the way and putting out amazing work that inspires. And so thank you for it. And again, thank you for hanging out with me here on Wicked Good Books, chatting the Unbroken and writing and inspiration and some nerdy content. And so I guess to close our chat here before we dip into a little mini Nona segment, I have one last question for you. And you can get long answer, short answer, no answer. It's totally up to you. As a person of color and a member of the LGBTQ+ community, what advice would you give to writers who want to share their voices or to be heard and wish to share their stories, but maybe feel as though they're parts of the world that are up against them, not necessarily just in the U.S., but anywhere in the world, because I feel like it affects the Earth as it stands currently. But that was a big question I wanted to ask you.
I mean, it's a thing, and it's just, you're just going to have to accept it as a thing. And there are people out there who have the resources and the ideas and the energy to fight it with like actual specific things. And if you're one of those people, then do it. So we've got like the folks who set up We Need Diverse Books, Beth Phelan, who started like one of the biggest Twitter pitch contest thing that's gotten lots of people agented, like people from diverse backgrounds agented, which was Dev Pitt, and I don't think that she's running it anymore. But stuff like that. Like there are people who are starting things, and if you have a great idea, go for it. But also be careful and discerning about who you choose to listen to and how you treat people. Like don't be a dick. But more often than not, like you're going to do the best job, the best work, if you keep your head on your own paper, keep your head down and out of the gossip and all of the drama. Like just don't do it.
Don't entertain it.
Don't entertain it, because it's gonna get you in your own head about your work. It's gonna get you in your own head about the industry. Oh God, don't look at industry news. Don't do that at all. I don't care what background you come from. Stop it. Close
Stop it. Absolute
toxic. If you need to know it, then your agent will tell you. And if you don't have an agent yet, you probably don't need to know it.
Right.
Because otherwise you'll never write again. Oh God, I think all of us stopped writing entirely to panic while the like Penguin Random House trial was going live. And so that was awful.
Yeah, I can imagine.
But then, just like finish the work and send it to people who have a proven track record. Like you can trace the track records by looking at the books with people who have the same background as you or similar, and see what houses they came out of, if they are talking positively about their experiences, because some of them will not. And then you can submit to those places and those people.
Well, that's excellent. I've been seeing, Orbit and Tor doing a pretty decent job at pushing just across the board with their authors, and Orbit especially. I've been seeing a lot lately too. I'm very interested to see. I'm like afraid to look into the publishing side of things and see like what that all looks like behind the scenes, but it is good to hear from that, and I'm sure more importantly,
and my team is great, which has actually been one of the best things about Orbit. I've been treated with respect. My characters have been treated with respect.
I love that.
Yeah.
So if anybody watching, if you're stuck on something or you got stories to tell that you want to, and you feel like there's someone out there that won't hear you, I think we're moving into a space where that is not necessarily always going to be the case, but you will have people that will listen to your stories and help you facilitate them and push them forward. And like Cherae said, like stick your nose to the paper and finish the work. I feel that's like the most critical part. Once you have something finished, from that point on, you can kind of follow the right avenues. And like we were saying in the beginning of this whole chat, the internet and the world we live in now is so different. I can't imagine what it would have been like, and granted different times, but if we were still on, like I had a thing called Writer's Market Bible or Writer's Market?
Yeah, like Writer's Digest Market or something like that. Yeah.
And you like look up like, okay, let's see, I'm running the science fiction opera story. Here's the science fiction opera section. Like that's just like weighing it and hoping that the person on the other end is not a complete asshole and like expecting, or even just at the very least a decent human being. Whereas now it's like, I'm gonna Google this person and figure out what they're all about. So I feel like we have all these resources, we can use them as intelligently as possible, and I hope that anybody watching that is trying to tell a story or would like to, they hear this and that they can do a better job than I'm doing getting my book out, at least. I think my professor said finished, not perfect, is his favorite motto. And that is what I'm trying to like really like as a mantra go over my head over and over again. So
you cannot revise a blank page.
Exactly. Truth. So oh my god, hey, my dog is like barking at the door because Target delivery. I just dropped off groceries. So thank you so much for hanging out again. Sure, this was awesome. I loved talking to you about your book and about writing, and I really hope to have you on again when book 2 comes out, as well as try to steal you on for the podcast so we can get real unhinged about some stuff too.
This has been really fun.
Absolutely. So thank you so much for your time. And anybody watching this, if you're wondering, actually, I'm never always sure where I want to guide them to get your books. I always want to make sure, like indie booksellers, your mom and pop stores, then your bigger brands online. Can you buy the books off your website or off Orbit's website?
You can go to Orbit's website, and I have the same links that will go to like the main stores. So yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Anybody watching this, we're going to talk about Nona the Ninth by Tamsyn Muir. It's a book that we both enjoy and both finished pretty recently. It's going to be very spoilery, so please stop watching at this point now. Because you will likely get spoiled. We won't go into too depth. I don't want to hold up too much of your time, but I did want to hear your thoughts and just kind of get really unhinged for a minute about it. Because I finished Nona back in June. I did not expect to get an arc. Someone in Tor is a fan of our podcast, and they had sent me one. I did not anticipate it, and it like messed up all my reading plans because I was like, I wanted to reread Gideon and Harrow and the short stories, and then that. So I had like speed read the other books again for like the third or fourth time, on top of doing the podcast and the short stories, which I feel like are pretty critical to this one.
I actually haven't read the Cam Powell one, which I obviously I need to now because I'm like, oh my god! And I kept thinking the whole time, I was like, oh my god, I need to stop and read that short story. I cannot continue, but I just couldn't stop. And so now I need to go back and retroactively fit that into my brain space.
It's a good one. It's a quick read too, and I feel like it really informs their dynamic and informs the Six Houses vibe too, like where they come from and what they're all about and what their mission is. That's kind of separate from the Empire. But I read it. I actually shared it, my arc, with my wife. We read it together because she's a huge fan too, and she became a huge fan this past year. And there were certain chapters I would read to her because like she would catch up to me. So I was like, well, I don't know, you can't go ahead of me now. So like, I'll read a John chapter to us together. So we did that for a while. And we both were like, we don't want to run through this book. We want to savor it because Electa was not for a while. And then we both proceeded to not savor it and just burn right through it. And I feel like that's probably the crux of most people that read a book they're really excited about. But there's something about this book that just made it like near impossible to put down.
It was just a really fast,
It goes by so quick. And I want to know like your favorite parts that stuck up to you. I know you were all jazzed up about Judy and Corona, and you were like, I hope I get to see them in this book. And I was like,
oh, that was so good. I love that part. I love Jody Beth. I'm ride or die for them. But I loved getting to know Pyrrha. And like as a genderqueer person, this book really, really hit hard for me because everybody's in a different body, and some people are happy about it, some people are not. Everybody's getting different gendered titles, which is something I love. And then we get Paul, which was, I was like, yeah. So it's just that part has been amazing. But also just I liked Nona. I liked Nona as Nona and her very young but old point of view and how she hung out with like the high school kids. Like, so I've taught high school age kids and I've taught younger, and it hit home for me. It hit home for me being in a classroom of small people. Sometimes they are like, oh, you are obviously a child. And sometimes they're like the most erudite human being dispensing wisdom from upon high, from upon low, I guess. And so I thought that was it was really well done. And I love getting to see how the OG Lictor squad got started.
That was some of my
had to read with like the dramatis personae from Harrow because I was like, who's M? There are too many A's, but obviously this is Augustine and
Mercy.
Yeah.
Those
but now I also want to know their real names.
Yeah, I'm very curious to know if it starts with those letters, but is a different name. You know,
I think that it must.
Yeah,
but
that was my best.
Because Annabelle is still Annabelle.
Yes. exactly. Yeah, those chapters are some of my favorite because I already liked John as a complicated character in the second one, and I liked him even more in my reread because I read him with a little less conviction and a little more like, okay, hold up, this guy is not the big bad evil emperor. At least he's not acting like it, and they don't have their shit together. And that was something I didn't really pick up on in the first two books. It was just like, oh, we're going to be lictors, and we're going to go fight for the Empire. And then when you reread it, it's like, oh no, they're in like mission critical, code red. Everything's falling apart. We're trying to replenish our ranks, and then this stuff happens. And so, learning John now in book 3 is just like this like sad boy. He just like all his friends are gone. He's like
he had to make them again,
and he's thinking like, where did I go wrong in all of this? And I love that the message for me was just like communicate with your friends. It's always going to be significantly more important than revenge against the shitty people of the world. And unfortunately that's like what he was consumed by, that vengeance quest. And that's one thing consistently all the lictors would say about John. It's like, oh, we love him, he's our friend. And you kind of in rereading it was like, oh, that's just because it's the Emperor. But it's like, no, they're actually all best friends. But John kind of like got lost in it and kind of like forsake them a little bit. And then 10,000 years, that's a long time. You have to be many different people, I guess, throughout that. But it was really cool to see these early days, which I was not expecting to get this like in the third book. I thought maybe like, I don't
know if I ever would expect to get it.
Yeah. It's cool because it makes me think, okay, I understand now why this was not going to be 3 books ever. I'm so happy that Nona got her own time to shine. And we got all this information because now book 4 is just going to be like this chaos, boss battle, final level, Mass Effect 2 suicide mission. Like, that's the vibe.
Man, I can't wait. I'm hoping by then, like, we're not local to each other per se, but like I keep hoping our circles will like smash together. But haven't quite made it happen yet.
That'd be amazing.
But if we can, oh man, because I got some questions.
Unstoppable.
But mostly I would like the early Electo.
Yes, for sure. The stuff with Paul blew my mind. It's funny. Pierre Ford, another booktuber, we were reading it together. She's over in Australia, and we just like voice memo back and forth, just like totally unhinged, like 4 a.m. This is happening. It's like no one who doesn't know what we're talking about would know what we're talking about. And when I got to the chapter right before Paul stepped on the stage, she told me like, I want you to record a video of you reacting to the scene.
Oh no!
I had that video and I've been waiting. I'm gonna release it on Twitter.
I can't wait.
It's not flattering at all. It's just like me ugly crying. But
I know, me too. I was like, no, wait, no, I'm with Pira. Don't do it. Whatever it is, don't do it.
And then they're like, no, we're not gonna do what you think we're gonna do. And you're like, for a minute, you're like, okay, what are you gonna do then? And they do something.
You're doing it.
Oh, that part crushed me, but also was like so beautiful and profound that happened in this book. And Pierre Devey too. That's a character that I did not expect to fall in love with.
Oh man, I fell unfortunately very hard between the dirty jokes and the breakfast that Nona didn't like. I was just like, and like flirting with Pash. And Cam and like literally anybody. I was just like,
I love it. It's by the end of Harrow, I was like, oh, that's really sad. She is stuck in Gideon Prime's body, and she's kind of like a wisecracker in that moment. But I wasn't 100% certain like how much we would get of them going into book 3, and then book 3 was like she was there the whole time in like a critical character that like wasn't just like Mercy or Augustine or the other lictors. She's actually really sweet and like nurturing and caring and like
in a sort of like gruff commander kind of way. Like, look, eat your breakfast, kid, and here's an ass joke.
Yes, like the Hard Knocks uncle or something. And she still went to work in the mines and doing these things. I found, but also like really cared about Pal and Cam and wanting to get them out. And it was so wholesome. And I was just not. I don't know what I was expecting of that character, but it wasn't that. And it totally subverted my expectation. And I fell in love with that character. The whole cast really is just pretty amazing. I want more of the Angel of AIM.
Yeah, I loved AIM. Yeah,
I want more of this character. I want to know what they're up to and where they came from and why. I don't think we're gonna get those answers till book 4, unfortunately. But yeah,
okay. So, but my theory was and one of my friends said no because she said she's from a different planet. But I think she's the 6th house messenger. Like she's part of the 6th house, which is why Noodle has 6 legs. And they're like, no, that's not it. And I'm like, guys, she literally Tamsyn does not do anything for shits and giggles.
Never.
Like it's all like if it has 6 legs, we put it on the 6th house until proven otherwise.
Exactly. He gets pushed into that pile of the 6th house. Well, because someone was like, oh, like, you know, John's big thing was puns and giving people ridiculous names, like waking me up inside. And someone was like, oh, AIM, the messenger, instant messenger, AIM messaging. Like,
well, that took me a long time. And then the MSN, like my friends had to point that out to me because I was thinking, oh, sen is probably another word for 6. Like, I mean,
yes,
there it is. So, like, maybe she's the other half, like whatever. So I don't.
There's so much to it.
I'll definitely have to go back and reread it now that because I sped through it too fast entirely. But I was trying to. I knew I wouldn't be able to read it fast enough if, like, to beat Twitter. Like I just wouldn't have been able to. So I was trying to intake it all before Twitter hit, before it actually came out.
Smart.
So now I can actually just let the theories wash over me, discard them as I want, enjoy all of the art as it's made.
Oh yeah. Marceline has some art that I am very excited for you guys to see. I linked up with her she's gonna be doing the podcast art for season 2 for us. And so we got like chatting and I was like, while I have your ear, because she had an arc of Nona and she sent me like a bunch of pieces that she's been working on for Nona.
Oh my
god! And they are pretty amazing. I can't wait for them to be in the world.
I love her appearance because I saw like the like breakfast scene one and I was like, it was before I had read the actual first chapter, escape, release, whatever. And but then I was like, oh my god, this is perfect. This is everything I've ever wanted. Like this is my Nona cast. That's who they are. And so now I am like, I need to see.
I'm so glad that, you know, we got all of them to the end too. Like we lost some characters in this book, but it was more like a book of putting pieces on the board to where they're going to be in the end.
And then we can just knock them all down.
I'm fully expecting her to break my heart like she did with Paul and like she did with Nona, just getting herself into Electo, like all that. Even honestly, between Paul, I think I was both sad and relieved when Paul stepped on the stage because I was like, I can't tell if I'm supposed to be happy or sad. I'm kind of both.
Yeah, because I miss them both as individuals.
Yes,
a lot.
And they really wanted to like they were kind of
see each other again.
The cassette tape conversation that wrecked me.
I know. Oh god, it was so good. And then we go straight back like, yeah, how do I do this?
Right? How do I take this, all of this? Because there's no waste. It all means something, but not in a way that feels like overly saturated. I'm never reading it. I'm never like when I'm reading Malazan, I'm like, oh my god, I know this is gonna mean something, but it feels like it's just too much, like too many details. And when I'm reading Lot 2, I'm like, that's suspicious.
See, and that's interesting because I thought Hera was like that. Now, to be clear, I've only read Hera once. And when I was reading it, I was like, yeah, bro, I don't know if I'm gonna go through this. And then Gideon came back and I was like, wait!
Did you do the audiobook for Hera?
No, but I did get the Gideon audiobook like for my next reread. I think I would like to audio all of them next as my next project.
Well, check out our podcast too. The Unlocked Tune podcast is great for rereaders and first-time readers.
Then I might.
That's
have
what
to
we're
do
about.
that.
The audio is special because Muir Quirk she does really amazing voices, amazing tones. That's all great. But when she's narrating Gideon the Ninth and talking as Gideon, she uses the same voice, same tone.
Yeah, right.
In dialogue, it's more witty and snappy. And then in prose and narration, it's still there, but very subtle. And in Harrow, all the second person narrations are in Gideon's voice.
Of course.
But it's like wish fulfillment. You're like, don't tease me, Tamsyn. Don't. I'm reading like, no, maybe that's just Moira. Just she just wanted to stick to the same voice. And there's like those little hints. You would have never guessed. You seen me. Where the last line is of the chapter, and you're like,
oh yeah,
what the fuck? Like it's there, and it blows your mind. And I feel like Harrow's.
I can totally see that. I mean, I think I read early on with that you being Gideon, but because I'd also read the 5th season, and so I was very used to a very skilled hand at second person, as well as some Baru Cormorant type stuff, like that cracked head grief type situation. And so though I didn't hear it audio I definitely took it in that spirit, and but then it was the end. I definitely got super lost with like the river and the resurrection monsters,
the stoma.
and so I was like, what the. And it made more sense in Nona, so now I think I can go back and understand it more. Now
She said herself, the reread is featured on a bug. She wants you to go back and reread them. And now, especially after Nona, because I was rereading Gideon for the podcast at the same time reading Nona, and it's like, wow, there's so much stuff there that I did. Like Canaan House is literally built on the facility that John and his people
That's what I'm picking up now. Did you see the codes? People broke the codes?
Yes, the tower. Like, I'm like, okay. There's mention
tower
of the tower.
Was John Gaius is the first one, and then the second one is like the Tower Awakes or something like that. Yeah,
I'm in my mind. I'm like, it's so full. I love that we all become like these like detectives, just like cross-referencing things, and like it's like it's literally the Charlie Day meme where he's like writing on the wall. I'm from Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It's just like cracks me up. It's super profound. I'm so happy it speaks to both of us, and I love talking about it. I can't wait to have you on the podcast. We can just go full on unhinged with the whole crew. You'll have Emily, Junior, and Lisa. Junior and Lisa read for the first time. That was their first read. So like our podcast is me and Emily are like the veterans, whatever you want to call it. And then those two are for the first time. We kind of like not guided them through, but like we read it with them, and they would ask questions, and we kind of like sprinkle in a little intel, and we keep going. And to watch like new readers just go through the whole, even Gideon's death thing was just like, it's beautiful and painful all at the same time.
Yeah.
I think one of my favorite parts of Nona the Ninth, other than all of it, because I just ate it up. And all the things, it felt like it spoke to that. I wrote this in my review too. It's like a light review because it doesn't really give away anything. It's more like for myself, like a note. It spoke to that like 13-year-old, 12-year-old me, at the beach house for one summer night, watching Adult Swim and Toonami anime, reading old fantasy novels on the beach or with my VHS tape, writing really crappy fan fiction. Like it just felt like it like was speaking to that person, like that fan. Like this is that kind of book, as well as really reminded me a lot of Evangelion, which is one of my favorite animes. And End of Evangelion, the movie specifically, was pretty much like the plot of Nona the Ninth. So while I was reading it, I was like, is Tamsyn a weeb? She definitely is.
Definitely, probably, yeah. I don't really have that much doubt. I can't possibly imagine not. But I've never seen it, so I might have to.
It's really dated.
Investigate.
It's very dated, and it'll feel that way in terms of progressiveness and just it would be. I think it is made differently with the rebuilds today. He went back and kind of made newer versions of it. But if you stick with it and kind of it's a product of its time, but then it gets better as it goes. You'll see all the lock tube inspiration there. One of my patrons, I kind of like got them onto it. It was like kind of the Sherpa for them all the way through, and they're like, "Oh my god, Tamsyn loves Evangelion." I'm like, "I'm telling you, she does." I'm gonna ask her when I see her if I ever get a chance to. The part that I think blew my mind the most though was in the facility when all hell breaks loose and John's sleep deprived, losing his mind, unable to hold everything together, and he knows at this point the trillionaires are leaving. It's all going to shit. He just goes into his room. And Tamsyn had said that Taika Waititi was her headcanon for him. So I read all his lines like Taika was saying. And the nun, I think it's Christabel, is knocking on the door. And she's like, "John, are you okay?" And he's like, "No, not really. Not doing good right now. It's not the time to talk." From that moment on, I was just ugly crying like the whole way through because I didn't realize that John was going to see all his friends go that way.
I didn't either. That surprised me. I was like, okay, and now this is when his friends get the powers, right?
Yes,
like,
exactly.
Now this time, wait, no, wait.
Yes. So you had the same reaction I had. I was like, this is the moment where they all become Power Rangers, right? This is it. And I was like, oh no, they didn't. That never happened. This whole
and then you see the little bundles of rags in the Nona timeline. I was like, oh my god.
Crushed me. Absolutely killed me. Excellent book. I'm so happy it's in the world and that we can all share and go frothing at the mouth about it. And I think that I'm excited to see where it goes and how she finishes it. How she can stick the landing, because I really do love all three books. And kind of going back into what our whole conversation was about writing, I've also learned a lot about it from a writing perspective too. It's taught me so much about myself and about me as a writer, me as a person, and I'm so excited to take those things into my own work and to see how I can kind of pick her brain a little bit and apply some of it to my work, but also just just straight up inspiration. Reading someone who's done it really well, but also has done something that I don't think would have existed 10 years ago. I know if I had brought that book, especially Harrow, into my writing class in my bachelor's degree program, my teacher would have been like, "This is trash. Like, this person's ruining fiction. They're messing with the form. They're doing too much. Toss this here. Read, Faulkner or Hemingway." Which, not to knock those authors, but like that was like what they were forcing us to read at the time. And so I'm really glad that we have authors like Tamsyn Muir and authors like you, C.L. Clarke, to go to kind of pave the way for new fiction, and especially in fantasy and sci-fi.
I appreciate being put in the same category as Tamsyn,
absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Your book is on that list of like, if you like this, you'll like that. People are like, if you finished Lock 2 or you finished Unbroken, everyone always trades. It's like a thing. I love it. And Marceline has said so. She only does a book.
Like I swear, I've already practically made a deal with her. I was like, "Look, you're selling more of my books than my own my own team. Like, should I hire you?"
What was your reaction when you woke up that morning and you saw Marceline's art? Did you know about it ahead of time?
I knew about the Luca, because she was like, because I was actually going to commission her, and she was like, "Look, I'm already working on something, but if you can tell me a bit more about what she looks like and stuff." And so we collaborated a little bit on the Luca one, and then she's like, "Cool, all right, I'm gonna do Cherae next," and I was like, "Oh my god!"
You're like, I'm not gonna say no. I love that. So cool.
Yeah.
Well, let's close this up and just be completely unhinged, just because we're still on our spoiler Nona segment, and then we'll wrap it up. What is your from the hip Hail Mary hot take theory of how the Locked Tomb ends? Not necessarily as a whole, just like pick a character, a storyline, or a thread. Pick one or all.
Well, I don't know. I think I was thinking that since Cam and Pal have proven that you can properly lictor yourself, I'm wondering if, like, because I think Gideon, Harrow Nona still has some Gideon inside her, and Kiriana Gideon has some Harrow inside her, or not some Harrow, but maybe, I don't know, has some Gideon inside her. But whoever made her, whatever, she still has some Gideon inside her. So I'm wondering if there's like a. But then Tamsyn just said they're never getting back together, and so I don't know if she meant that like literally, figuratively, or all of the above.
I saw that. I'm like, you would say that. Like, that is almost like, it has to be literally, or at least like when I read that, I'm like, I can't believe that she said that. That's the most.
But she also said something about lying about everything. So yeah, like the most untrustworthy narrator of the bunch is Tamsyn herself. So
I'm positive. I'm just like betting. I'm putting all the chips in. The chips, my unused master's degree that's sitting over there, and my slightly more used bachelor's degree on top of my chips here, and saying it's going to be John Gaius is going to surrender himself to Harrow and be absorbed by Harrow, so that the Dominicus doesn't go out because he's like tied to it or whatever. So he's going to say, "There's nothing left for me here. I'm going to let you and Gideon rule the Empire, or rule as you see fit, and try to make peace between these two factions." And he's going to because Harrow is capable of absorbing multiple souls, going to become, in a sense, godlike, and then, depending on the dynamic, Gideon might sit on the throne, and Harrow become her like bodyguard / like a wizard assistant / lover / paramour, or the other way around. That is like my hot take. I'm sure that, I hope something like that happens, because if they all go down in a blaze of glory, I don't think I will emotionally ever recover from it. And I also hope that Corona and Judy get to have a happy ending.
Yes. Oh.
They have to. They've gone to what Judy has gone through way too much shit to have a sad ending, and I will send hate mail. I mean, I won't really, but I'll be so upset if at least Judy doesn't get a happy ending, because she's gone through a lot.
Oh, poor Judy. And I mean, so is Corona, and I really like the Cain Abel aspect between her and Ianthe. I love that a lot.
Oh yeah. That's happening for sure.
So yeah, I think it's very like I can't. One of them has to kill the other, but how is obviously, but the way they were protecting each other in Nona.
So very sisterly love, but also like they have this like really like it's not a parasitic relationship, but it's like symbiotic relationship, the two of them, and that, like twins should. I think it's really cool. I'm very curious to see and very nervous to see how that Cain and Abel parallel goes through, because I think it's going to be what we all think it's going to be. I'm like, I don't know if I'm ready for that either. I'm pretty much I'll probably have to take off a month of work after I finish Electo to like just emotionally recover from the psychic damage that Tamsyn Muir is probably going to inflict onto me. So we'll see.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much again for hanging out and talking some Nona the Ninth unhinged spoiler talk. I hope we can do it again soon. I think when and if I get to have you on the podcast, hopefully, we're definitely going to do like an unhinged Nona episode where it's just me, you, and Emily just going nuts about it.
That'll
be so much fun. But I hope you have a great rest of your evening, and everyone look out for the Unbroken by C.L. Clarke, and keep an eye peeled for Faithless, which comes out March 7th in the US and March 9th in the UK. Very much looking forward to that cover art drop. I have a theory of who I think it is, but I'm not going to say it because I just kind of want to be right when it happens. So we'll see.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you guys for watching.
Thank you, Cherae. And everyone that's watching, you know where to find me. Give the video a like below, and I'll drop in the links to Cherae's website and book. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Stay wicked.